The rhythmic tapping of Alexander Lee's fingers against the chrome armrest echoed through the examination room of Metro General Hospital. Outside the window, autumn leaves scattered across the parking lot, their dance a stark contrast to the sterile whiteness within. At 45, Alexander's weathered hands bore the calluses of 2 decades in construction, each mark a testament to the company he had built from the ground up. Tracy Painley's manicured fingers interlaced with his, her wedding ring catching the fluorescent light. 18 years of marriage had taught him every nuance of her touch, but today something felt different, mechanical, perhaps rehearsed. "The cough is probably just stress," Tracy said, her voice carrying an odd note of tension. "You've been working too hard on that new development project." Alexander cleared his throat, suppressing another cough. "Maybe, but Jonathan insisted on these tests." The door opened with a soft click as Dr. Jonathan Griffith entered, his casual stride betraying none of the gravity in his eyes. The thick manila folder in his hands might as well have been made of lead for the weight it carried. "Alex, Tracy," Jonathan began, pulling up his rolling stool. The informal use of their names, a remnant of their college days, could not mask the professional distance in his tone. "I have your test results." Alexander felt Tracy's hand twitch in his. Her other hand slipped into her purse, fingers brushing against her phone. "The imaging shows a mass in your left lung," Jonathan continued, his words measured and careful. "The biopsy confirms it is malignant, stage 3 non-small cell lung cancer." The words hung in the air like smoke. Alexander's construction-trained mind immediately began calculating angles, measuring distances, and planning solutions. But this was not a structure he could repair with blueprints and careful planning. "What is the survival rate?" Alexander asked, his entrepreneurial instinct driving him toward data, toward concrete numbers he could grasp. Jonathan leaned forward, spreading several scan images across the small table. "With aggressive treatment, the 5-year survival rate is around 30%. But Alex, you're younger than most patients we see with this diagnosis, and your overall health is excellent. We have multiple treatment options available." Tracy's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then quickly tucked it away. "What kind of treatment options are we looking at?" "A combination approach," Jonathan explained, pulling out several pamphlets. "Chemotherapy will be our primary weapon, but we'll also want to consider radiation therapy. There are also some promising clinical trials." Tracy's phone buzzed again. This time, she stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "I need some air," she mumbled, her voice thick with what Alexander assumed was emotion. In her haste, her phone clattered onto the chair as she rushed out. Alexander reached for the device, intending to bring it to her. The screen lit up with another notification, and his world shifted on its axis. The message preview showed a name that had been familiar for 20 years, Rick Nunes. The words that followed turned Alexander's blood to ice. "Hey babe, finally. Now we don't have to poison him slowly. Nature's doing our job. Once he's gone, the kids already agreed to testify that he was abusive, so we get everything." Alexander's hands trembled as he held the phone. The medical pamphlets lay scattered and forgotten at his feet. He turned the screen toward Jonathan, whose professional demeanor cracked as he read the message. "My God, Alexander," Jonathan whispered, quickly closing the door Tracy had left open. "Whatever you do next, don't let them know you've seen this. Don't let them suspect anything's wrong." Alexander stared at the phone, his mind racing through years of memories. Rick Nunes, his best friend since college, the best man at his wedding, godfather to his children, the man who had helped him start his construction company, who had spent countless weekends at their home, who had coached Marcus's little league team. The kids, Alexander managed his voice, hoarse. "Emma and Marcus, they're saying my children." Jonathan moved closer, speaking in hushed tones. "Alex, listen to me carefully. You're facing 2 battles now, and both are literally life or death. We need to start your treatment immediately, but you also need to protect yourself and your children. Do you have someone you trust, someone neither Tracy nor Rick would suspect?" Alexander's mind wandered to a recent project, a home adaptation he had done for a disabled veteran's son. Glenn Massey, a retired Marine Corps intelligence officer, had insisted on paying something, despite Alexander offering to do it at cost. They had spent several evenings talking while the work was being completed, and Glenn had given Alexander his card with a promise. "If you ever need anything, day or night, call me." I might, Alexander replied quickly, forwarding the message to his email before deleting it from Tracy's phone. I might have someone. The door handle turned, and Tracy reappeared, her composure restored. She smiled apologetically, though the expression didn't reach her eyes. Sorry about that. It was just overwhelming. Of course, Jonathan replied smoothly, handing her back her phone. As I was saying about the treatment options, Alexander sat through the rest of the consultation in a daze, nodding at appropriate intervals while his mind raced. Every touch of Tracy's hand now felt like a serpent's caress. Every concerned look she gave him carried the weight of years of deception. But he maintained his facade, remembering Jonathan's warning. As they left the hospital, Tracy's hand on his arm, Alexander thought of his children. Emma, 17, with her dreams of becoming an architect like her father, and Marcus, 15, who had inherited his love for baseball. And building things. What lies had they been fed? What poison had been dripped into their tea? I'll drive, Tracy offered, her voice gentle. You've had enough shocks for one day. If you only knew, Alexander thought, following her to their car. He pulled out his phone, ostensibly to check work messages, but his fingers moved to compose a text to Glenn Massey. Need your help. Matter of life and death. Can we meet tonight? The response came almost immediately. My office. 8 p.m. Come alone. Glenn Massey's basement office looked nothing like the stereotypical private investigator's den from noir films. Instead, it resembled a military command center with multiple monitors displaying security feeds and a wall of sophisticated equipment that hummed quietly in the background. The space smelled of coffee and gun oil, and the only concession to comfort was a worn leather couch where Alexander now sat, his hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee. Run it by me again, Glenn said, his military short gray hair catching the blue light from the monitors. Every detail matters. Alexander recounted the day's events, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. Glenn's presence had a steadying effect. Here was someone used to dealing with crisis situations, someone who understood strategy and survival. The message mentioned poison, Glenn noted, typing rapidly on one of his keyboards. Have you experienced any unusual symptoms besides the cough? Alexander's hand went to his throat reflexively. The cough started about 6 months ago. Tracy's been very insistent about my taking various supplements. She says will help boost my immune system. Glenn's typing paused. We'll need samples of everything you've been taking. And Alex, stop taking them immediately. You think they actually... I think we assumed the worst and work backward from there. Glenn pulled up several databases on his screens. Rick Nunez, you said? Let's see what we can find about your best friend. Over the next 2 weeks, while Alexander began his initial cancer treatments, Glenn's investigation continued. The investigation revealed a pattern that rendered the original act of betrayal almost quaint by comparison. Look at this, Glenn remarked one evening, spreading surveillance photographs across his desk. Rick isn't merely having an affair with Tracy. He has been systematically embezzling from your company through a series of ghost contracts. Alexander scrutinized the documents, his eyes catching the discrepancies in material orders and labor costs. These invoices, he noted, they're for projects we never undertook. Exactly, Glenn confirmed, and that is only the beginning. Glenn then pulled up financial records on his main screen. They have taken out additional life insurance policies in your name. The signatures are convincing forgeries, but the dates are revealing. Each policy was purchased shortly after your initial symptoms appeared. Alexander leaned back, running a hand through his thinning hair. The chemotherapy had already begun to take its toll, but the evidence of such calculated betrayal struck him with a force greater than any medical treatment. What about my children? He asked, dreading the answer. Glenn's expression darkened. That is where it becomes worse. I have been monitoring their communications, he said, reaching for a different folder. You need to see this, but I want you to prepare yourself. Inside were transcripts of text messages and emails exchanged between Tracy, Rick, and various appointments with child psychologists. The systematic manipulation of his children's memories was laid out in clinical detail. They have been working on this for years, Glenn explained. Selective reinforcement of negative experiences, subtle suggestions, even creating false memories of events that never occurred. It is a technique called memory implantation, and they have been employing it on both Emma and Marcus. Alexander read through the transcripts, his hands trembling with rage. How could they do this to children, to their own children? That is the other thing, Glenn said quietly. I do not believe they plan to keep the children around once they obtain what they want. He then played an audio recording, the voices of Tracy and Rick filling the room. As Rick filled the room with his presence, Tracy's voice cut through the tension. Once we secure their testimony and the insurance money, we'll need to disappear completely. The children will only complicate matters, she continued. They're old enough to forge their own paths now. Rick nodded in agreement. Besides, they'll never forgive us once they understand what we've done. It's better to make a clean break. In Glenn's office, Alexander surged to his feet, pacing the length of the room with restless energy. I need to tell them. I must show them what's happening right now. Not yet, Glenn cautioned, his voice measured. We need more evidence. We must catch them in the act and document everything thoroughly. If we move prematurely, they'll deny all allegations. At this moment, your children are predisposed to believe them over you. On Glenn's largest monitor, video footage played with startling clarity. The high-definition image remained crystal clear despite having been captured through a window at Rick's lake house. Alexander watched with a breaking heart as Tracy and Rick sat comfortably with Emma and Marcus on the expensive leather couch, a possession he never knew Rick owned. Try to remember, Emma. Tracy's voice came through the directional microphone with unsettling clarity. You were 7, perhaps 8 years old. Your father had been drinking heavily. I don't recall. Emma's face scrunched in confusion. I remember feeling frightened, but... The plate, Rick prompted gently, his hand resting comfortingly on Emma's shoulder. Remember the plate he threw? Emma's eyes widened with dawning recognition. Yes, I remember now. He was so terribly angry. Alexander gripped the arms of his chair until his knuckles turned white. I never threw anything. I've never even raised my voice to them. That's the most insidious part of this, explained Dr. Claire McPherson, the child psychologist Glenn had brought in as a consultant. They're not merely lying to your children. They're actively reshaping their memories. The human mind proves surprisingly malleable, particularly when it comes to childhood experiences. On the screen, Marcus shifted uncomfortably. I don't remember Dad throwing anything. You were younger, Tracy said smoothly. Sometimes we block out traumatic memories as a protective mechanism, but they remain buried within you. Honey, that's why you become anxious when people raise their voices. Remember? Marcus began pulling at a loose thread on his sleeve, a nervous habit Alexander recognized from whenever his son felt uncertain or distressed. His son was troubled, I suppose, but Dad's never scared me, not really. That's the fear talking, Rick interjected. It's okay, buddy. We're here to help you remember the truth. Glenn stopped the footage. Marcus is your weak link in their chain. He's showing resistance to the implanted memories. If we're going to break this open, he might be our best chance. Alexander stared at the frozen image of his children, his hands trembling slightly from his latest round of chemotherapy. They're taking everything from them, not just their father, but their real memories, their sense of what's true. We're not going to let that happen, Glenn promised, his military bearing becoming more pronounced. We're going to save your kids and make them pay for every lie they've told. Dr. McPherson nodded in agreement. Once we expose the manipulation, we can begin proper therapy to help them separate fact from implanted fiction. But Glenn is right. We need to move carefully. A premature confrontation could push them further into Tracy and Rick's narrative. Alexander stood, moving closer to the screen. He touched the image of his children's faces, leaving a smudge on the monitor. How much more evidence do we need? We're close, Glenn assured him. My contacts at the FBI are building a case for criminal charges. We just need to catch them explicitly planning their next move. Keep going to your treatments. Keep acting normal. Let them think their plan is working. Alexander nodded, his builder's mind already constructing a different kind of project, not of wood and steel, but of truth and justice. He would rebuild his family's foundation stronger than before. But first, he had to carefully dismantle the web of lies that threatened to destroy everything he loved. Whatever it takes, he said quietly, his voice carrying the same determination that had built his company from nothing. Whatever it takes to save my children. Sylvia's corner office overlooked the city's downtown district, its windows streaked with early morning rain. The criminal defense attorney's desk bore none of the customary family photographs or personal touches. only neat stacks of case files and a single potted succulent. Glenn had recommended her for precisely this reason. She lived for her work, and her 90% success rate proved it. "Walk me through the timeline again," Sylvia said, her Mont Blanc pen poised above a legal pad. She had already filled 3 pages with notes during their 2-hour meeting. "When did you first notice the supplements?" Alexander retrieved his phone, checking the calendar application. The chemotherapy had rendered his memory hazy at times. "Tracy started with the vitamins about 8 months ago, small white pills she claimed would boost my immune system. The cough began 2 months after that." Alexander's hand drifted to his throat, a habit he had developed since the diagnosis. "She was insistent about the supplements, would watch me take them every morning." Sylvia's pen scratched across the paper. "We'll need those analyzed. Glenn, can your laboratory contacts handle that discreetly?" Glenn, standing by the window, nodded. "Already sent samples to a private lab in Virginia. Should have results by the end of the week." "Good," Sylvia said, turning to a fresh page. "Now, about the company finances, these ghost contracts Rick created. I need every detail." Alexander spread the financial documents across Sylvia's desk. His builders I had caught discrepancies that others might have overlooked. "See these material orders? The quantities don't match any of our actual projects." He pointed to a series of invoices. "And here, these labor costs are for a crew that doesn't exist. How long has Rick had access to your company's finances?" "He helped me start the business 20 years ago. Handled most of the accounting since then." Alexander's voice cracked. "I trusted him with everything." Sylvia's expression softened slightly. "That's exactly what predators like Rick count on. Trust is their hunting ground." She pulled up another file on her computer. "Look at this." The screen displayed police reports from 3 different states, each bearing Rick's name. He appeared in each instance, though with slight variations. Richard Nunez, Rick Nunez, Martinez, R.J. Nunez. The same pattern repeated in every case. Sylvia explained, "He targets successful business owners, particularly those in construction or real estate, usually through their wives. The affairs last 2 to 3 years, during which he systematically drains the companies. When the money is gone, both he and the wife disappear." Alexander's hands clenched. "They've never targeted the children before. That's what makes your case different." A new voice joined the conversation as Dr. Claire McPherson entered the office. The child psychologist carried a thick folder of her own, her professional demeanor masking obvious concern. "Dr. McPherson," Sylvia stood to greet her. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Call me Claire," she said, taking the seat next to Alexander. "I've reviewed the video footage Glenn provided. What they're doing to your children is a form of psychological abuse called memory implantation. It's similar to techniques used in cult programming." Alexander's throat tightened. "Can it be reversed?" "With proper therapy, yes. But we need to document everything first, every session they have with the children, every story they plant. It's all evidence of systematic abuse." Glenn's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression darkening. "Speaking of documentation, they've scheduled another therapy session with the kids for tomorrow." "Where?" Sylvia asked. "Rick's Lake House again. They seem to favor it for these sessions." "We'll have audio and visual coverage," Claire said, her tone professional but her eyes angry. "Every lie they tell those children is another nail in their legal coffin." Alexander pushed himself to his feet, fighting a wave of chemotherapy-induced nausea. The latest round of treatment had been particularly brutal, but he forced himself to focus. "What's our next step?" Sylvia gathered the documents into organized piles. "We build an airtight case. Every financial transaction, every forged document, every manipulative act. During our sessions with the children, we document everything. Glenn's surveillance provides us with the necessary evidence, while Claire offers expert testimony regarding the psychological abuse. I will ensure that it stands up in court and for the children." Alexander's voice carried the weight of a father's concern. "How do we protect them while this unfolds?" "We watch and wait," Claire advised. "Any premature intervention might push them further into Tracy and Rick's narrative. We need them to begin questioning things on their own." As if on cue, Glenn's phone buzzed once more. His eyebrows lifted as he read the message. "That might be happening sooner than we thought. Marcus just texted his mother asking to visit Alexander in the hospital tomorrow." Alexander's heart leaped. He hasn't visited since the diagnosis. This could be important. Claire cautioned. But remember, no confrontation, no accusations. Just listen and observe. Marcus needs to come to his realizations naturally. In the hospital room, the afternoon light cast long shadows across Alexander's bed. The chemotherapy IV dripped steadily, marking time like a metronome. He had timed this treatment deliberately, wanting Marcus to see the reality of his condition, not for sympathy, but for truth. Marcus entered hesitantly, his lanky teenage frame seeming to fold in on itself. At 15, he stood as tall as his father, but today he looked smaller, uncertain. "Hey, Dad." Marcus hovered near the door, his hands stuffed into his jacket pockets. "You look like I'm fighting cancer," Alexander offered with a weak smile. "It's okay to say it." Marcus moved closer and took the chair beside the bed. His eyes darted to the 4 bags, the monitors, all evidence of his father's battle. "Does it hurt?" "Sometimes. The medicines they use to fight the cancer are pretty strong." Alexander kept his voice neutral, factual. "But the doctors say I'm responding well." A nurse entered to check Alexander's vitals, nodding approvingly at the numbers before leaving them alone again. The silence stretched between father and son, filled with unasked questions. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice barely rising above a whisper. "Dad, something doesn't feel right." Alexander's heart raced, but he kept his expression calm. "What do you mean?" "Last week, I heard Mom and Rick arguing. They didn't know I was home. I'd forgotten my baseball glove and came back early from practice." Marcus pulled at a loose thread on his sleeve, just as he had in the video footage. "Rick said something about sticking to the story, and Mom said they couldn't risk the kids finding out the truth." Alexander's hands gripped the hospital blanket, but he forced them to relax. That must have been confusing to hear. And the memories they keep talking about. Marcus looked up, his eyes searching his father's face. "The plate you supposedly threw. I keep trying to remember it, but it feels wrong, like trying to recall a movie I never actually watched." Years of construction work had taught Alexander the importance of a solid foundation. You couldn't build anything lasting on shifting sand. He thought carefully before speaking. "Marcus, what do you remember about your childhood? Not what you've been told to remember. What do you actually remember?" The boy's brow furrowed in concentration. "I remember you teaching me to use tools in your workshop. You were always super careful, making sure I knew about safety first. And when I got frustrated because I couldn't do something right, you never yelled. You just said, 'Measure twice, cut once.' We finished together. Those are real memories, aren't they?" Marcus asked, his voice cracking. "Not like the other stuff." Alexander reached for his son's hand, relief flooding through him when Marcus didn't pull away. "I have never, would never, hurt you or your sister. Every memory of love, of patience, of teaching and learning together, those are real." Marcus's shoulders began to shake. "They've been lying to us, Mom and Rick. They've been making us believe things that never happened. I think," Alexander said carefully, "it's time you saw something." He nodded to the corner of the room. In the room where Glenn had been seated, nearly invisible in the shadows, he opened his laptop and pulled up one of the recorded therapy sessions. Marcus watched, his face draining of color as he saw himself and Emma being coached, witnessing the careful manner in which Tracy and Rick planted suggestions, twisted memories, and created fear where none had existed before. "Oh God," Marcus choked out. "Emma, they're still doing this to Emma." "We're going to stop them," Alexander promised. "But we need your help." Glenn moved forward, his military training evident in his precise movements. "Marcus, what we're about to ask you is difficult and potentially dangerous. You'll need to pretend everything is normal while helping us gather evidence. Can you do that?" Marcus wiped his eyes and straightened in his chair. In that moment, he looked less like a confused 15-year-old and more like the man he was becoming. "What do you need me to do?" Glenn's basement command center hummed with activity. New monitors had been added, each displaying different aspects of their operation. One showed a live feed from Rick's lake house, another tracked financial transactions across multiple accounts, and a third displayed a complex timeline of events. "Your cancer's taken a turn for the worse," Glenn explained, pointing to the latest medical report they had carefully doctored. "According to this, the treatment isn't working as well as hoped. The prognosis is 3 months, maybe less." Alexander examined the report. "They'll want to verify this." "Already handled," Sylvia interjected. She had been practically living in Glenn's office for the past week. I have a contact in hospital records. The information is in the system if they check. They're checking, Marcus confirmed from his position at one of the monitors. He had proved remarkably adept at surveillance work. His teenage facility with technology combined well with Glenn's training. Mom just accessed the hospital portal from her phone. The wait was excruciating. Alexander forced himself to breathe slowly, fighting both the tension and the rising dread. The lingering effects of his most recent treatment and the anxiety of waiting weighed heavily upon him. Finally, Marcus's phone buzzed. She was calling. Rick answered, placing the call on speaker. Tracy's voice filled the room. Did you see it? The new prognosis. I saw it, Rick replied, his tone edged with excitement thinly veiled as concern. We need to move faster. How are the offshore accounts? Almost ready. But Rick, the kids. Stick to the plan, Tracy. Once we have the insurance money and the company assets, we'll be set for life. The kids would only complicate things. Marcus's hands clenched into fists, yet he maintained his composure, just as Glenn had trained him. Alexander felt a surge of pride through his anger. His son was far stronger than Tracy or Rick had ever anticipated. Over the following week, they watched as Tracy and Rick accelerated their plans. Company assets began disappearing, transferred through a complex web of shell corporations. Insurance paperwork was updated, and new accounts appeared in banks known for their discretion in handling large transactions. They're getting sloppy, Sylvia observed, reviewing the latest financial records. Making mistakes in their hurry. Good, Glenn replied. He turned to Alexander. It's time to bring in my FBI contacts. We've gathered enough evidence now, the financial fraud, the psychological abuse, the conspiracy. They'll want to move quickly. Alexander nodded, then looked at Marcus. Are you ready for what comes next? Once we involve the FBI, there's no going back. Marcus glanced at the monitor, which showed Emma in her room doing homework, still unaware of the truth about to unfold around her. I'm ready, he said. Emma deserves to know the truth. He swallowed hard. Mom and Rick need to pay for what they've done. Glenn made the call. Within hours, his basement office was filled with federal agents, each assigned to a specific aspect of the operation. They moved with quiet efficiency, documenting transactions, analyzing recordings, building their case. We'll need your sister's testimony eventually, one agent explained gently to Marcus. Marcus, but not until she is ready. Dr. McPherson will help with that. The pieces were falling into place. Tracy and Rick's carefully constructed web of lies was about to collapse. Yet Alexander felt no satisfaction, only a deep sadness for his children and all they had endured. Dad, Marcus's voice pulled him from his thoughts. What happens after, when this is all over? Alexander drew his son close, his heart aching at how long it had been since he had been able to offer such comfort. We rebuild together. Every memory they stole, every lie they told, we replace it with truth. And this time, we build on solid ground. The monitors continued their silent vigil, recording every move Tracy and Rick made, every conversation, every attempt to destroy a family for profit. But they had underestimated the strength of real family bonds, the resilience of truth, and the determination of a father's love. The endgame was approaching, and this time, Alexander held all the cards. The family therapy center's waiting room smelled of artificial lavender and broken promises. Tracy sat primly on the beige couch, her manicured nails drumming against her designer purse. Rick stood by the window, his confidence evident in his stance. Neither noticed the slight bulge under the receptionist's desk, where surveillance equipment had been carefully installed the night before. Emma perched on the edge of her chair, dark circles under her eyes betraying nights of troubled sleep. Marcus sat beside her, his hand occasionally brushing against the recording device Glenn had concealed in his jacket pocket. The weight of it felt like armor. Remember what we practiced? Tracy whispered to Emma, her voice carrying easily to the hidden microphones. Dr. Patterson needs to hear about the incidents clearly. What Tracy did not know was that Dr. Patterson had called in sick that morning. In his place, Dr. Clara McPherson sat in the consultation room, reviewing the final pieces of evidence with Alexander and the FBI agents. They are all here, the receptionist announced. Through her earpiece, Claire received confirmation and gave a nod to Alexander. Are you ready? She asked. Alexander adjusted the collar of his shirt, concealing the medical port beneath it. The most recent round of chemotherapy had left him physically weakened, but a fierce determination burned in his eyes. "I've been ready," he replied, his voice steady, "since the day I saw that message on Tracy's phone." The receptionist's voice crackled through the speaker in the waiting room. "The doctor will see you now." Tracy stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Come on, kids," she said. "Remember, honesty is important." Marcus caught Emma's hand as they walked toward the consultation room. She squeezed it back, not understanding why her brother's palm felt so sweaty. The consultation room door opened to reveal not the elderly Dr. Patterson, but a full complement of law enforcement officials, Child Protective Services representatives, and Dr. Claire McPherson. Alexander was seated in a chair near the large screen mounted on the wall, with Glenn standing like a sentinel beside him. "What is this?" Tracy's composure cracked. "Where is Dr. Patterson?" "Please, everyone, take a seat," Claire said, her professional tone brooking no argument. "We have some recordings to review." Rick moved toward the door, but an FBI agent blocked his path. "This is a closed session, Mr. Nunes," the agent stated. The large screen flickered to life. The first image showed Tracy and Rick at his lake house, coaching Emma through her memories of abuse. Emma's face drained of color as she watched herself being manipulated, saw the careful way they planted suggestions, and twisted her recollections. "That's not." Emma's voice trembled. "You said those were therapy sessions." "Keep watching," Marcus whispered. The next clip showed Tracy and Rick in what they believed was a private moment, discussing their plans. "Once we get the insurance money and the testimony, we disappear." Rick's voice filled the room. "The kids would just complicate things. They're old enough to make their own way." "But what if they try to find us?" Tracy asked. "They won't," Rick replied confidently. "Not after we're done making them believe their father was a monster. Besides, who would believe them?" Throughout all the documented abuse, Emma's world tilted. She turned to her mother, desperate for denial, an explanation, anything at all. But Tracy's face had hardened into a mask of cold calculation. "You were going to abandon us." Emma's voice cracked. "Everything you told me about Dad, it was all lies." "Emma, honey, you don't understand." Tracy reached for her daughter, but Emma recoiled. "Don't touch me." The teenager's legs gave way, and she would have fallen if Alexander had not moved swiftly to catch her. "Daddy, I'm so sorry. I really thought. They made me believe." Alexander held his daughter as she broke down, years of manufactured fears and false memories crumbling before undeniable truth. Marcus moved to join them, forming a protective circle around his sister. Rick made another move toward the door, but Glenn stepped into his path. "Going somewhere? We haven't even gotten to the financial evidence yet." Claire gestured to the FBI agents. "I believe you have some questions for Miss Payne and Mr. Nunes." As the agents began reading Miranda rights, Emma clung to her father, her tears soaking into his shirt. "How can I trust any of my memories now? How do I know what's real?" "We'll figure it out together," Alexander promised, stroking her hair. "That's what family really means. Not manipulation, not lies, but standing together through the hard times and helping each other heal." Tracy's mask finally cracked as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. "Emma, Marcus, please. You have to understand. I was trying to protect you." "From what?" Marcus's voice carried all the scorn of his 15 years. "From a father who taught me how to build things. Who came to every baseball game. Who never, ever raised his voice, let alone his hand. The only monsters here," Emma said quietly, "are you and Rick." The courthouse hallway echoed with footsteps and whispered conversations. Alexander sat on a wooden bench outside courtroom SE, his children flanking him like honor guards. The chemotherapy had taken his hair, but not his dignity. If anything, his presence seemed more resolute than ever. Her gaunt appearance served to highlight the stark contrast between reality and Tracy's manufactured accusations of abuse. Sylvia approached her trial notes, organized in her signature leather briefcase. "The jury's coming back," she observed. "That was fast. Only 4 hours of deliberation. Is that good or bad?" Emma twisted the friendship bracelet on her wrist, a nervous habit she had developed during the trial. In a case this complex, Sylvia's lips curved in a satisfied smile. "It's very good. It means the evidence was overwhelming." They filed back into the courtroom. Tracy and Rick sat at separate tables with their attorneys, both looking considerably less polished after 3 months in county jail. The evidence against them had been too substantial for bail. The jury filed in, none making eye contact with the defendants. The foreman handed the verdict forms to the bailiff, who passed them to Judge Marion Wheeler. The judge's face remained impassive as she reviewed the documents. "Will the defendants please rise?" Tracy stood, her orange jumpsuit a far cry from her usual designer wardrobe. Rick's confident smirk had finally cracked, revealing the desperation beneath. "On the count of conspiracy to commit fraud, how do you find?" "Guilty, Your Honor." "On the count of attempted grand larceny?" "Guilty, Your Honor." The verdicts continued: guilty of child psychological abuse, guilty of embezzlement, guilty on all counts. Emma gripped Alexander's hand with each pronouncement, while Marcus sat straight-backed, his expression stern. Judge Wheeler set aside the verdict forms. "Before I proceed with sentencing, I want to address something specific about this case." She looked directly at Tracy and Rick. "In my 30 years on the bench, I've seen many financial crimes. I've seen theft, fraud, and embezzlement. But what you two attempted goes beyond simple theft of money. You tried to steal children's love for their father. You attempted to destroy the very foundation of their reality, their ability to trust their own memories and experiences. Is this an unforgivable crime?" The judge adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Nunez, given your prior history of similar schemes in 3 other states, I sentence you to 25 years in state prison. Miss Payne, you are sentenced to 15 years. She paused, her gaze hardening. "And let me be clear, these sentences are to be served consecutively, not concurrently. There will be no opportunity for early release." Tracy crumpled in her chair. Rick's facade finally shattered as the bailiffs approached to lead them away. "Emma, Marcus," Tracy called out, "please don't let it end like this." But her children had already turned away, following their father from the courtroom. In the hallway, they found Glenn and Claire waiting. "It's over," Glenn said simply. "No," Claire corrected gently. "Now the real work begins. Healing, rebuilding trust, reconstructing authentic memories to replace the manufactured ones." Alexander hugged his children close. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes, we'll do it together." 6 months after the trial, Alexander stood in the cancer ward of Metro General Hospital, his hand hovering over the brass bell that patients rang to mark the end of their treatment. The latest scans had confirmed what his body had already begun to tell him. The cancer was in remission. "Ring it, Dad." Marcus called from where he stood with Emma, both teenagers beaming with pride. Alexander gripped the bell's rope, and its clear tone rang through the ward. Medical staff appeared from various doors to applaud. Many of them had been with him through the darkest days of his treatment. Dr. Jonathan Griffith emerged from the crowd, pulling Alexander into a careful hug. "When you first came in for that cough, I never imagined we'd be fighting 2 battles at once." "3 battles," Emma corrected, joining the embrace. "The cancer, their betrayal, and in our own minds." She'd been working with Claire twice a week, slowly untangling the web of false memories from her authentic ones. "Speaking of minds," Claire said, appearing with a stack of journals under her arm, "I believe these might help with that reconstruction process. Ensure your new writing prompts are prepared. Marcus, your focus will be on early baseball memories. Emma, we will work on those classroom recollections you mentioned during our last session." The teenagers collected their journals without complaint. The writing exercises had become a crucial part of their therapy, helping them strengthen genuine memories while identifying and processing the fabricated ones. "Glenn is waiting at the house," Marcus reminded them. "He is grilling steaks to celebrate." The drive home took them past their old neighborhood, but Alexander felt no pull toward the house he had once shared with Tracy. Instead, he turned toward the new development where they had started fresh. A home he designed himself with input from both children. Glenn stood at the grill on their back deck, the aroma of perfectly cooked meat filling the air. The retired Marine had become such a fixture in their lives that the neighbors assumed he was a relative. "Perfect timing," he called out, flipping a steak. "Emma, those potatoes you prepared are ready to go in the oven." As they settled around the outdoor table, Alexander watched his children, truly watched them. Emma no longer flinched at sudden movements, and Marcus had stopped compulsively checking his phone for messages from Tracy. They were healing, all of them, in their own ways. I have been thinking, Emma said, pushing her vegetables around her plate. I want to go back to the community center, maybe volunteer with the art program again. Alexander understood what this meant. The community center had been where Tracy first began planting false memories about his behavior during Emma's art classes. Returning there was more than volunteerism. It was reclaiming her space and her real memories. I will go with you, Marcus offered. They probably need help with the Little League program anyway. Alexander nodded approvingly. That is excellent progress. Remember what we discussed, replacing negative associations with new, positive experiences. Glenn raised his glass. To new experiences, then, and to family. A bond built upon truth and trust, genuine and steadfast, Emma added, her eyes shining as she looked at Dad. For fighting for us even when we did not realize we needed saving. Later that evening, Alexander stood at his bedroom window, watching Emma and Marcus playing basketball in the driveway. Their laughter floated up through the gathering dusk, real and unburdened. The shadows had lifted, replaced by the warm glow of authentic connection. On his dresser, 3 items sat in a row. The brass bell from the cancer ward, a family photo taken at the courthouse after the verdict, and a small construction level. The level, he decided, would become their family's new symbol, a reminder that with the right foundation and careful work, anything could be built straight and true. Even a shattered family could be rebuilt, one authentic memory at a time. Epilogue 10 years later, the autumn breeze carried the scent of fresh coffee from Alexander Lee's new workshop, a sprawling space behind his rebuilt construction company headquarters. At 55, his hair had regrown silver after the chemotherapy, matching the distinguished lines around his eyes. The past decade had left its marks, but they were badges of survival rather than scars of defeat. Dad, the Mitchell project designs are ready for review, Emma's voice called from the office. At 27, she had followed in her father's footsteps, earning her architectural degree and joining the family business. Her designs had already won several sustainable building awards, bringing a fresh perspective to Lee Construction's portfolio. Alexander smiled, remembering how far they had come. The same hands that once trembled holding Tracy's phone now steadily guided their company toward new horizons. The business had not only recovered from Rick's embezzlement but had grown stronger, with Marcus handling the financial side after completing his MBA. No contract was signed, no transaction approved, without multiple sets of eyes reviewing the details, a lesson learned at too high a cost. Send them to the conference room, he called. Glenn was coming by to see them as well. Glenn Massey, now fully gray yet still maintaining his military bearing, had remained an integral part of their lives. His security consulting firm occupied the east wing of the building, and he had become the uncle figure the children never had. His wedding to Claire McPherson 3 years earlier had simply formalized what they all already knew. Their unlikely family had grown stronger through adversity. Marcus entered, carrying fresh coffee with his suit jacket draped over one arm. At 25, he had developed into a shrewd businessman with an unwavering moral compass. Just received the quarterly update from the Victim Restitution Program, he said, setting down the cups. 2 more of Rick's previous victims have been fully compensated. The program had been Marcus's initiative after discovering more of Rick's past victims across different states. He had established a fund to help them recover their losses. It was his way of turning their family's trauma into something positive. Any word from the parole board? Glenn asked, entering with a tablet under his arm. Alexander shook his head. Tracy's 3rd appeal was denied last month. The psychological abuse charges particularly stuck. Claire's testimony made sure of that. The mention of Tracy brought a familiar weight to the room. She had served 8 years of her 15-year sentence, maintaining her innocence despite overwhelming evidence. Her letters to the children had stopped after year 5, when neither Emma nor Marcus replied. The last they had heard, she had developed a reputation in the women's correctional facility for manipulating younger inmates, resulting in her losing privileges and being transferred to a higher security unit. Rick's fate had been even grimmer. His 25-year sentence had been extended after he attempted to run another scheme from inside prison, trying to manipulate a guard's wife into smuggling contraband. The additional charges had effectively ensured he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. I saw her last week, Emma said quietly. As she entered the room with the project files, the atmosphere stilled. They all knew exactly who she meant. At the grocery store, of all places, remember Mrs. Henderson? She used to play bridge with Mom. Alexander nodded in recognition. The bridge club had been one of Tracy's hunting grounds, where she had first spread whispered lies about Alexander's temper. She couldn't look me in the eye, Emma continued, spreading the blueprints across the conference table. None of them can anymore, not after everything came out during the trial. The whole bridge club dissolved, you know. Nobody trusted each other after realizing they'd all been used to verify my mom's false stories. Claire arrived as Emma was speaking, her therapist's insight as sharp as ever despite her semi-retirement. She now focused solely on cases involving false memory implantation, having become a leading expert in the field. Her paper on the Lee case, published with the family's permission and with names changed, had become required reading in several psychology programs. How did seeing her make you feel? Claire asked, settling into her usual chair. Emma's hands traced the lines of her latest design as she considered the question. Sad mostly. Not for her, but for who I thought she was. The mother I remember from my early childhood. I still don't know how much of that was real and how much was manipulation. The good memories can be real, even if the person who helped make them turned out to be false, Claire reminded her gently. It was a therapeutic principle they had developed together over years of sessions. Marcus loosened his tie, a gesture reminiscent of his teenage self. I got another letter from Rick last week. He's still trying to claim he was manipulated by Mom, that he lost himself in her scheme. He shook his head. The investigators found his previous cases, though, 3 other families before us. He was always the architect, not the victim. Speaking of architects, Glenn interjected, sensing the need to shift the conversation. Show me these new designs, Emma. That sustainable materials program you proposed is exactly what the city contract needs, Emma declared as she launched into her presentation. Alexander observed his family, the one he had fought so hard to protect, and the one that had grown beyond blood ties. Glenn and Claire sat nearby, their shoulders touching, while Marcus took notes with the same focus he had once devoted to baseball. Each of them bore scars from their shared ordeal, yet they had learned to carry them with grace. The workshop windows overlooked the memorial garden they had planted 5 years earlier, a space dedicated to victims of psychological abuse. It had been Emma's vision, a way to transform their pain into purpose. Over time, the garden had become a sanctuary for other families healing from similar betrayals. Its paths were lined with plaques offering resources and hope, and Claire's therapy groups often gathered there, sitting among the flowers and sharing their stories. Some days, Alexander would overhear fragments of their conversations, tales of betrayal, manipulation, and eventual triumph that resonated with his own journey. Each account reaffirmed what he had come to understand, that the greatest victories often arrive disguised as defeats, and the deepest wounds can become wellsprings of strength. A young woman emerged from one such group session, wiping tears from her eyes. Alexander recognized her, the daughter of one of Rick's earlier victims, only now beginning to untangle the web of lies that had ensnared her family 15 years before. Marcus had located her during his research for the restitution program. Mr. Lee, she called out, spotting him through the window. I wanted to thank you. What your family did, exposing them, establishing the support network, it helped me understand what happened to my mother. Alexander invited her inside and introduced her to the others. As she shared her story, he noticed Emma and Marcus exchange glances. They recognized their own past suffering in her words, but also the possibility of healing. Later, as they locked up for the day, Glenn reflected, You know, when I first installed those surveillance cameras at Rick's Lake house, I never imagined we would end up here. Running a construction empire, hosting therapy groups, and changing lives. Life has a peculiar sense of humor, Alexander reflected as he checked the security system, a habit he had never outgrown. Sometimes, the most profound betrayals guide us toward our most authentic paths. The setting sun cast long, slender shadows across the workshop, but unlike the shadows of their past, these were clean and honest, stretching toward the garden where new flowers perpetually bloomed, much like the hope that had taken root from their darkest hours. Later that evening, they gathered at Alexander's house, upholding a tradition that had weathered every storm. Claire brought her signature lasagna. Glenn mixed his famous mojitos, virgin versions for the younger members of their extended family, and Emma's teenage daughter, Sophie, practiced card tricks she had learned at school. Sophie, born 3 years after the trial, embodied everything they had fought for, a new generation nurtured in an environment of authentic love and honest memories. She had been told an age-appropriate version of the family's history, yet to her, it felt like a tale from another world. Her reality was woven with Sunday dinners, family game nights, and the unconditional love of a father, uncle, and grandparents who had learned the true meaning of family through hardship. As Alexander watched Sophie deal cards with the same focused expression Marcus once wore during baseball games, he understood that this was their true victory. It was not the prison sentences, the recovered assets, or even their professional achievements, but this, the simple, profound ability to create genuine memories, untainted by manipulation and deceit. Tracy and Rick had sought to shatter his family with false memories, yet in doing so, they had imparted to everyone the immeasurable worth of truth. Their betrayal compelled Alexander to fight not only for his life, but for the very essence of family and love. In winning that struggle, he and his children forged something far stronger than what they had lost, a legacy of honesty, resilience, and unconditional support that would echo through generations. Through the generations, the evening drew to a close as it always had, with everyone joining in the tidying up, making plans for the following week's dinner, and sharing the small, everyday details that compose the fabric of a true family's life. There was no manipulation, no hidden agendas, only the simple truth of people who had chosen to confront life's trials together. As the final car departed, Alexander lingered in his doorway, breathing in the cool night air. Somewhere, within the confines of a prison cell, Tracy and Rick were living with the consequences of their actions. Yet here, in the very home and family they had sought to destroy, life blossomed anew, demonstrating that the strongest foundations are built not upon deception, but upon the bedrock of unwavering love and truth. He closed the door, set the alarm, a habit that dies hard, and smiled at the family photographs lining the hallway. Each image told a story of recovery, renewal, and a kind of love that only strengthens when tested by fire. The shadows had long since lifted, and in their place, a legacy of truth continued to flourish, season after season, year after year. Here our story reaches its conclusion. We invite you to share your reflections in the comments below. Thank you for your time. If you have enjoyed this story, please subscribe to this channel, select the video you see on the screen, and I look forward to seeing you there.